Hello and welcome to the color tutorial. How you work with color is pretty straightforward. You just pick whatever you need to adjust, and it works on vector stuff, so it's not going to touch your images. It works with most types of colors in Figma, like strokes, fills, shadows, gradients, and what you need to do is just open the plugin, do the adjustments you need, maybe add some more adjustment layer, and just close the plugin and it applies the changes and you're done. This is the whole thing. If you want to undo the changes, just press Command Z and this does the regular Figma's undo, and you are where you were before you opened the plugin. So it's pretty safe to experiment with. But of course, I encourage you to make copies before you adjust anything. As you might have noticed, there are a couple of adjustment types in color. This is the global mode, which is pretty straightforward. It's like hue, saturation, lightness in Photoshop, but it's more precise. And there are several layers that are basically curves. And hue to hue, hue to chroma, hue to lightness means that what you pick and what you adjust. Let's say you want to make these red colors darker or lighter. This means that you need to select based on the color, which means you start with hue, and you need to adjust the lightness, so it's hue to lightness. And how the curve works is that this is the range of the colors, the source colors, and I want to pin the colors I don't want to be affected. Let's say these yellows somewhere here, and these like purples, and then I just do whatever I want with these reds. So I drag them up, they go lighter, and I drag them down, they get darker. And every layer has this visibility toggle, so you can turn them on and off and see how it looks before and after the adjustment. And of course you can reset any adjustment to where it was before. So let's try to reapply this. Let's pin these points. Let's make them a bit lighter to decrease the contrast. And then you can stack multiple adjustments on top of each other. For example, if you have this adjustment, for example, I shift colors and these are no longer red, and maybe other colors become like reddish, like these. This adjustment layer works on top of these adjustments, so if it picks reds and make them lighter, it means that it's going to pick these colors now and make them lighter. So, and this is exactly what's happening here. And if you toggle these previous adjustments off, you'll see these changes apply to the hands. So now the hands are getting darker and lighter. And this is one concept you need to keep in mind. And otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. Your strategy is basically to pick what you need to adjust and then pick the appropriate curves. So let's say I want to make these blues less saturated. And the logic is basically the same. I pick the hue first because I pick the color, and then now instead of going to lightness, I pick hue to chroma. And I guess the blues are somewhere around here. I add a point, I pin the colors I don't want to be affected, and I drag this down. As you can see, blues are moving towards the gray color. And now you see that these colors, all of the blues in the selected layers, are changed to this new saturation level. But now I want to make this, to bring the contrast down. What this means is basically I want to make the dark colors lighter. Dark colors lighter means that I need to target lightness, and what I'm going to adjust is also lightness. These are the dark colors, these are the light colors, and if I pick this point and drag it up, you see that all of the dark colors are shifted towards something lighter. Let's not go too far, let's keep it reasonable, and just like that, you see that the vibe of the illustrations has changed completely. And remember that you can target basically anything. So if I turn these layers off, and let's say I want to make saturated colors less saturated. So I pick chroma to chroma, and these are less saturated colors, these are more saturated. And now I just bring the more saturated colors down, and now there is no such difference in color saturation. Before that, you see that this t-shirt is desaturated and this is pretty saturated. And if I turn this on, you see that now everything is calmed down to roughly the same level. As you might have guessed, there are countless ways you can apply color. You can apply it to icons, illustrations, landing pages, trying color schemes, whatever. And one of the cases I want to show is how you can make a draft dark mode in a couple of minutes. As everything is vector here, it's basically the same workflow. You open color, and now you want to make dark colors light and light colors dark. And we have exactly that. We have lightness to lightness curve, and you can bring the dark colors up and light colors down, and here you go. And as all of the color adjustments work independently, so you can see that the greens, they remain green, even though they change their lightness. So it's pretty easy to retain the colors you had. As you can see, this dark mode is pretty crude, so let's try to fix that. Let's bring the pitch black color somewhere to the reasonable range. And by the way, you can use keyboard shortcuts to adjust points. So once the point is selected, you can just move it up and down by nudging it. And if it's a point in the middle, you can also move it horizontally, and holding shift, you can move in larger increments, and use delete to remove the points. And you can use tab to move around the UI. So you can shift tab to move back and tab to move forward, and press space to focus the point. And now you can get precisely what you want. Let's keep it here. Now I want to make more contrast here, but the problem is that I have inverted basically everything, and now I want to target these dark colors, and I already think about them as about dark colors, but in reality they are light colors in the source. So to avoid this thinking, and I'll just add another lightness to lightness curve, and now it's applied on this dark mode, and now these colors are somewhere here. And I think it's safe to assume that most of the colors are below this point, so I pin here. And now I need to adjust this to be lighter and this to be darker, or stay the same. So I guess this is somewhere here. So let's try to lift it. It works, it gets lighter, as well as this part, but let's add another point, move it down, and see if it affects this range, and it doesn't. And let's move it to the right, and now it does affect this range. And oops, Let's make the curve less steep. So the contrast is less abrupt and applies equally to all of the UI. And here you go, we just applied the contrast to this exact range. It's not going to bring you right to the very end, at least not in this first version. So you see that there are gradients. This gradient is applied as a lightness mode, so it's not going to work in this kind of adjustment. And there are parts that also not work perfectly, but I think it's a pretty good start. And as you can see, it's pretty controllable and you can get pretty far in a couple of minutes. At this point, I think you might already be ready to use it. So if you're in a hurry, you can just go and do that. But I'm going to get a bit into details of how color works. And I hope that makes the results more predictable for you. The most important thing about color is that it works in OKLCH color space. What this means practically is that it's just more precise most of the time than RGB-based adjustments like hue, saturation, lightness in Photoshop. And it can also adjust color, saturation, and lightness independently. So, for example, if you drag this slider, it tries to maintain the saturation and lightness intact. And this is absolutely not the case in other tools. For example, if I set it to -100 here, and if you check these saturation levels and darkness, it's roughly the same. It's around the same values. But if you switch to affinity, and it's basically the same adjustment, same shift in hue, but for some reason they have it in other direction. So you can see that everything has changed. This is dark and saturated. This is also dark and saturated. You see this got to this nice soft orange color, and this got to the bright yellow. So everything goes haywire while you're doing this. And you can basically see it as you drag. You can see that everything just goes in all directions. It's just like unpredictable. And here it's just more restrained. And all of these curves work in the same manner. They adjust what they say they adjust and not anything else. Regarding the global mode, there is one more thing that is not seen anywhere else, probably, unless you adjust settings for color management in Photoshop and conversion intents. And what this thing does is when you crank up the saturation, it tries to maintain saturation gradation. So you can see it here, like everything got saturated, but if you turn this on, there's still this less saturated, but more saturated and more saturated as it was before the adjustment. So it tries to maintain these gradations. And you'll see this more clearly here. What this is the same lightness, but different colors, and this is less saturated and more saturated to the right. But the problem is that not all of the colors can have the same saturation range. If you take a look here, this is clearly visible that the range here in here is much larger than here. So basically blues cannot get as saturated as these magenta colors. And the same difference here. If this teal color can go only up to here in terms of chroma value, and the blue can go up to here, and the magenta can go here. And if I launch color and start cranking up these, let's get rid of the dots. So if I start cranking up the saturation, you can see that it's just like a bar of the same saturation. So all of the differences are gone. But if I turn on this relative chroma mode, it tries to maintain at least some of the differences. It's not perfect, but you can still see the difference here. It just tries its best. If you not go as high as previously, there's still a difference. You can see that before that, the adjustments applied equally to all the colors. So all the colors, saturations are shifted equally. But if you turn this mode, it tries to maintain the relationship between the colors. And this is how it looks now. One more thing that might be important to your workflow is how color applies changes in Figma. For example, let's take a look at this selection. We have like this list of colors that are used there. And if you launch color, you see that color attaches a color variable to each and every color. It creates a temporary variable collection. And once you adjust anything, what color does, it adjusts the actual variables. And Figma applies these changes to all of the artwork, all of the layers that are currently selected. And after you're done adjusting, you close this, you close the plugin, and all the variables disappear and changes are just getting applied. Of course, you understand what it means to your variables that were attached probably before that. It means that color has to unbind all of your variables to do these temporary variables, and this is what you get at the end. If the plugin gets some traction, or once I need it myself, I plan to add a feature to reattach the colors to the pre-existing variables based on the color proximity, but the feature is not there, so this is how it is at the moment. Another thing that is connected to variables is how all this works with component instances. So this UI, as most of the UIs in Figma, is made out of component instances. And the problem with that is that if you try to bind a variable to something inside of the nested instance, Figma is very slow in applying these changes. In practice, whenever you launch color on such a frame, which has a lot of nested components, you see that it takes a lot of time to actually bind the variables to each and every color here. But it's not actually the binding that takes time, but this propagation of the overrides on Figma components. And if you just don't understand what I'm saying, the thing is that if you see this message, it means that eventually it's going to finish the job, but it may take minutes, and in complicated cases it might take up to half an hour. And I couldn't find a way to make this faster because this is how Figma works in this case. What you can do here, as the message says, you can install the Destroyer plugin by Kirk Bentley, and you can detach instances. Unfortunately, this is the only way to deal with this in reasonable time. So what you can do, you can cancel this. But if binding went too far, unbinding back, which plugin does to clean up after itself, also takes a lot of time. If you don't care about some leftover variables, you can just cancel unbinding as well. And then you close the plugin through this button. Because if you try to close it here, it will start to unbind, which will take roughly half of the time it took to bind these variables. So we click this. As you can see, there are some leftover temporary variables, but you can disregard them whenever you launch color next time. It will clean them up along with the temporary collection. It's not pretty, but it is what it is. And to make this work, you need to launch Destroyer and get rid of the instances. So it has an option, destroy instances. You just run that. It also takes some time, and I think it's done. So now you can, as you can see, oops, I did it once again. Yeah, now as you can see, it doesn't take that much time. This is one thing you have to deal with sometimes if you're dealing with UIs, but Hopefully I'll fix this later somehow, or Figma makes this particular operation faster. Also, one thing I wanted to add, that the plugin currently is not supporting pattern fills, maybe something else, I don't remember at the moment, because Figma plugin API is not allowing to bind variables to pattern fill colors. And as soon as Figma ships variable binding to that, I will just add a couple of lines of code and it's going to work. I hope this tutorial makes sense for you. If you have questions, ask them in the comments here, in the comments on the community page in Figma, and feel free to DM me on X. I'll do my best to fix the bugs and maybe even implement some of the new features. So take care and have a productive day.